everyone. Hello, everyone. Enough is enough. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I am so pleased to be with you tonight. Let me thank my friend Joe Solomonesi for that kind introduction. And let me tell you, as the national head of the Human Rights Campaign, members have gone up in the past 7 years from 700,000 to 1,300,000. By any stakes, that is pretty good. Joe has done an extraordinary job leading this Human Rights Campaign Fund, the HRC, during such an important time in our nation's history. I count on Joe, and I count on each of you to keep the pressure on Washington until we achieve our shared mission, and what I believe is the defining civil rights issue of today: equal treatment under the law for LGBT Americans. So, I want to start tonight with a short progress report on our legislative efforts to achieve equality for the LGBT community and describe the very inspiring and positive change in attitude I see happening in this country. Let me begin with Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I was one of only a handful of senators who voted against the law 9 years ago in 1993. It was obvious to me at the time that the criteria for serving in the United States Armed Forces should be courage, competence, and a willing to serve, period. No one should be turned away because of their race, their gender, or their sexual orientation. Late last year, because of the courage of so many service members and the advocacy of organizations like HRC, Congress passed and the President signed a law to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell once and for all. Now the day has arrived. If you want to serve your country loyally and proudly, you no longer have to hide in the shadows. But one area in which the Congress has not had that same level of success is marriage equality, and this is our next challenge. Simply put, I believe strongly that the Discriminatory Defense of Marriage Act, called DOMA, should be struck from federal law. Now, this is a cause that's been near and dear to me for a long time. I was one of only 14 senators to vote against the Defense of Marriage Act 6 years ago when it passed in 1996. It was wrong then, it is wrong now, and ladies and gentlemen, it must be repealed. So, earlier this year, I introduced the Respect for Marriage Act in the Senate to just do that. And the bill is simple. It strikes DOMA from federal law. It allows the federal government to provide basic stability, security, and fairness to the tens of thousands of married same-sex couples in the country. That includes the 18,000 in California. To date, 30 of my colleagues have co-sponsored this legislation. A companion bill in the House of Representatives recently got its first Republican co-sponsor, and I hope more will see the light. The Department of Justice has announced it will no longer defend the law in courts, and the Judiciary Committee of the Senate has held the first congressional hearing on repeal of DOMA this past spring. President Obama has endorsed our bill, and next month, the Senate Judiciary Committee will vote to pass the Respect for Marriage Act, and it will come out of committee. Now, let me explain why I feel so strongly about repealing this law. DOMA is both an unprecedented and unjustified intervention by the federal government into family law. Family law has always traditionally been the preserve legally of the states. Chief Justice Rehnquist, an appointee of Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan, once wrote that family law, and I quote, has been left to the states from time immemorial and not without good reason. So those who embrace the notion of federalism should reject DOMA for the invasion of traditional state authority. What's worse, DOMA represents an unprecedented federal intervention for a single solitary purpose: to specifically discriminate against gays and lesbians by writing them out from marriage and denying them basic federal rights which every other married couple has. Let me say, we've been married for more than 30 years. We share 4 wonderful children and 7 grandchildren. And by virtue of our marriage, we have more than 1,100 federal rights and protections under the law. We're exactly like the thousands of same-sex married couples in this country who share financial expenses. Actually, he raises more than makes more than I do. Who raise children together, who care for each other in good times and in bad, in sickness and in health, until death they do part. But DOMA denies same-sex marriages all federal rights and benefits, including the right to file joint federal income taxes and claim certain deductions, to receive spousal benefits under Social Security, to take unpaid leave under the Family and Medical Leave Act, to obtain the protections of the estate tax law when a spouse passes and wants to leave his or her possessions to the other. At the judiciary hearing this past spring, we heard some very compelling and really heartbreaking testimony about the pernicious effects of this law and how DOMA affects same-sex couples in ways that are intensely personal and very painful, and often comes at that time in their lives when they are the most vulnerable. Let me just briefly share 2 of those stories with you. Ron Wallen, a 77-year-old man from Indio, California, testified before our committee about the harm DOMA caused him after his spouse died. Ron married his partner of 58 years, Tom Carollo, in California before the freedom to marry was stripped away by Proposition 8. Tom died in March of this year. In his testimony, Ron said, and I quote, "Tom died 4 months ago, and I miss him terribly. At times, it's hard to imagine how life's going to go on without him. I wake up in the morning and forget for a minute that he's not in the kitchen making coffee. And beyond the emptiness caused by the loss of the man I have spent my entire adult life with, my life has been thrown into financial turmoil because of DOMA." End quote. Because of DOMA, Ron was denied access to Social Security survivor benefits. He could no longer afford to live in the house he shared with Tom in India. He was forced to leave his home, leave his memories behind, and continue to struggle elsewhere. Just not right. Jill Johnson Young is a widow from Riverside. She legally married the love of her life, Linda, in 2008. They shared their lives for 23 years. Linda serves in the Navy and as an emergency room nurse. 4 days before their wedding, Linda was told she was terminally ill and had less than 3 years to live. Before she passed away, one of her final wishes was to be buried in a national cemetery, but only if she and Jill could eventually be married together. DOMA prevents that. As Jill said, despite her service, our country made her unwelcome in our national cemetery. This is what DOMA does to families, to friends, and to neighbors. This should not be the law of the land of the free. It's wrong, and it must be repealed. I know the passage of Proposition 8 was a setback for marriage equality. I opposed this measure, as Joe said, before it passed in 2008, and I believe, as you all do, that it was a terrible mistake to write discrimination into the California Constitution. Even as Proposition 8 winds its way through the courts, I remain an optimist about the cause of marriage equality in California and across this great country. I am optimistic that because of the work of the Human Rights Campaign and so many organizations like the Courage Campaign and citizen activists, this will bear fruit. Remember, a decade ago, not a single state permitted same-sex couples to marry. And again, as Joe said, today, the District of Columbia and 6 states, Connecticut, Iowa, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Vermont, and most recently New York, recognize same-sex marriage. Now, just 6 short years ago, in 1996, Americans opposed same-sex marriage by a margin of 68% to 27%. That's 2/3, more than that, opposed. Today, 3 separate polls between April and July of this year showed that a majority of Americans are now in favor. What a turnaround. Let me conclude with a personal story. San Francisco is my hometown. I was born here, educated here, ran for office here, and so on and so forth. My career in public service began as a member of the California Women's Board of Terms and Parole. From then, the Board of Supervisors, and eventually I had the great privilege of serving for 9 years as mayor. Don't use this against me, but it was 42 years ago that I ran for the Board of Supervisors, 1969. To the best of my knowledge, I was the first candidate, and at that time the only candidate, to seek public endorsement of the gay community. No one had done this before. I remember walking down 6th Street, south of Market, on the west side, going up a narrow staircase, straight up about 60 steps. And at the top was a large room and about 150 men and women who were part of the Society for Individual Rights, headed by a good friend of mine and ambassador who's here, Jim Foster. I asked for their endorsement, and I was very grateful to receive it, and I have never forgotten it. I was elected, topped the ticket to the Board of Supervisors, became its president, and the rest is history. Then I hired a young man by the name of Peter Nardoza, who, to the best of my knowledge, was the first government staffer in City Hall at the time. Peter was with me when I announced the assassination of George Moscone and Harvey Milk, and he continued on in public service. I'm sorry to say that we lost him from cancer earlier this year, but he was a wonderful person and a great public servant. My point is that the LGBT community has been an influential voice and political action for change for as long as I've been in public life. And your biggest role remains to be played. I've been privileged to see the enormous maturing of this community. I've been privileged to see the creativity, the business sense, the ability to be a part and an important part of the United States of America in my days. And I will never forget those steps going up to the Society for Individual Rights in 1969 as an unknown, something that had never been done. Women were not elected in those days, asking for the support and receiving the support of this community. Some battles take 2 years, some takes 5, some take 10, and some take longer. They stretch across generations, but we are on the cusp of change. Candidly, I don't know how long this battle for full equality will take. I do not know what will happen to Proposition 8 in the courts, but I pledge to you tonight that this senator is in it for the long haul. I will not give up, and you will not give up, no matter how long it takes. So stay with me and walk with me, and we will get there, I promise. Thank you. Thank you.